Okay, hello and welcome everyone. So this is video 3 corresponding to chapter 1 of the Stevenson and Wolfers reading. So in the previous videos, I introduced economics and the 4 principles of economics, which we see right here. In earlier videos, we saw the cost benefit principle, we saw the opportunity cost principle, and then now I'm going to talk about the marginal principle. Right. So the marginal principle is basically telling us that we should break down how much or how many decisions into a series of smaller decisions, into incremental comparisons of the additional benefit versus the additional cost of doing another unit of the activity. So a really good example would be like how many times to hit the snooze button in the morning, right? So should you get up immediately? Or does the marginal benefit of sleeping another 5, 10, 15 minutes exceed the marginal cost of spending that time sleeping? In that example, the marginal cost would probably be an opportunity cost, the foregone ability to use that time for something other than sleeping, right? All right. So the marginal principle, kind of going over this again, is telling us that the optimal decisions are going to be made when breaking down larger decisions into smaller increments. And the idea is because now we can focus on the additional extra benefit of one more unit versus the additional extra cost of one more unit of that activity. Now, it's really important that I emphasize the distinction between the marginal principle, before I go any further, and the cost benefit principle. I mean, actually, like the marginal principle is one way to apply part of the cost benefit principle, but they are indeed two very distinct principles, right? The cost benefit principle is telling us we should evaluate the full set of costs and benefits. In particular, we should pay attention to opportunity cost, which then invokes principle 2. We see there's interrelationships between these. The key with the cost benefit principle is we want to identify what are the relevant benefits, what are the relevant costs, and then make that comparison. Ignore sunk costs, identify opportunity costs, so on and so forth. That's the cost benefit principle. What makes the marginal principle specifically the marginal principle is that you're thinking incrementally. You're thinking about the additional benefit versus the additional cost. Right? So what you want to do is you want to break down how many decisions into a series of smaller decisions, into the incremental decision, then compare the marginal benefit to marginal cost. So part 2 actually looks like the cost benefit principle, right? Part 1, that's the incremental portion, and then you make the comparison of comparing cost to benefits. What again makes the cost benefit principle different is the emphasis on the full set of costs and benefits and everything that's relevant to the decision. All right, so the marginal benefit, that's just defined as the additional extra benefit from one more unit of goods purchased, hours studied, hours sleeping, so on and so forth. Marginal cost is the extra cost from one additional unit. Buying one more coffee, spending another 10 minutes working out, spending another 5 minutes sleeping, whatever is the case. All right, so when's the marginal principle useful? Well, it's going to be useful for how many decisions, not for either or decisions, right? So in either or, you do one thing or you do the other. And you can't really break that down into an incremental decision. The marginal principle is good for finding like the optimal stopping point when you're like accumulating sort of iterations of whatever is that activity, right? So this would be like, all right, when am I going to stop running? So should I stop when I get to my driveway, or the driveway before, or the driveway after, right? You've got this incremental decision. That's a how many decision. It's like how many feet, how many miles, whatever should I run? The either or decision would be, should I run or not? Although you could recast that as, should I run today? How many days this week should I run, or whatever is the case? Or, if you don't like running, you could think in terms of biking or working out or whatever else, right? All right, so the basic idea is we want to apply the marginal principle first, then apply the cost benefit principle. It's kind of like as I was modeling a second ago, right? So this is the way that we would use this. So the marginal principle is useful for the how many decision. The cost benefit is useful for either or choices, right? All right. So applying the marginal principle, think of like a sort of a breakdown here. How much to buy, right? Well, we can make this an application of the marginal principle by then recasting this as, should I buy one more, right? If the question is how much to buy, how much coffee should I buy, how much Gatorade, how much bottles of water, right? you can always break this down as a question of, should I buy one more? And at a certain point, the answer is yes. And beyond a certain point, the answer is no. And that'll be like with the point where it switches from yes to no is the optimal stopping point. So this is the diagram that Justin likes to use to teach this, which is like, okay, how much to buy? Let's apply the marginal principle by recasting this as asking, should I buy one more? Well, this then allows me to apply the cost-benefit principle by looking to see, specifically, is the marginal benefit bigger than the marginal cost? If so, then I buy one more. If not, then you'd stop. Right, and so that's what this is showing right here. Okay, so right, can you apply the marginal principle to simplify the following decisions? So how many workers should I hire? Well, you can break this down into, should I hire one more worker? And the answer to the question might be different if you have one person working for you or if you already have 10, right? How many pairs of shoes should I buy? You can break this down to, should I buy one more pair of shoes? How many classes should I take this semester? You could break this down to thinking of incrementally, should I take one more class, right? Okay, so the next thing is the way that we can recast the marginal principle in terms of thinking about giving rise to what we'll call the rational rule. Now, I want to sort of emphasize this. The rational rule arises out of applications of the marginal rule, the marginal principle. Now, the marginal principle actually applies in a lot of different places throughout the course. Turns out we'll have a different rational rule that therefore follows, right? So there's a rational rule for consumers, there's a rational rule for sellers, there's a rational rule for employers, there's a rational rule for employees. And in any other situation that you want to think of, these all always follow from the marginal principle. It's basically a way to kind of concisely state the advice that the marginal principle is giving you, right? So here's how this goes. The marginal principle gives us a guideline to help us maximize your economic surplus. What the rational rule is telling us, following from the marginal principle, is, well, if something's worth doing, you'll keep doing it as long as your marginal benefit equals your marginal cost. Right? Or keep doing it, not as long, you keep doing it as long as your marginal benefit is greater than or equal to your marginal cost. You'll stop doing it, right? You'll keep doing it until the point where marginal benefit exactly equals marginal cost. Following the rational rule gives us good decisions and also actually maximizes economic surplus because it allows us to go up to the point where the benefit of whatever is that activity equals the cost. All right, so we'll go back to Narita and we'll think about how many workers to hire. So below are the projections. I don't know if I can make this a little bit bigger. This might work a little bit better than it did in the previous slide. I think it does for a point. I'm going to have to make it smaller then to go back and fill this data in. But all right, anyway, so here's the number of workers, here's the meals served, here's the total benefit, here's the marginal benefit, total cost, marginal cost, and then profit or economic surplus. And I think we're thinking about this in the context of like a restaurant. All right, so here's our number of workers, here's the number of meals that are served, and we see if I go from 2 workers to 3 workers, I can serve more meals. In particular, I go from 160 to 210, right? Okay, 160, let's see, 40 gets me up to 250. Okay, so I'm able to get an additional 50 meals when I hire the 3rd worker. That's going to be my marginal benefit, right? Kind of. So that's the marginal benefit is telling us it's the change in total benefit from hiring an additional waiter. All right, well, what's my total benefit? My total benefit is going to be my revenue. This is going to be $25 times my amount of meals, right? So what I need to do is I need to get revenue. I'd have to take my 160 times 25, and then I take my 210 times 25. The marginal benefit is the additional contribution going up from, it's like the value of this of these 50 meals that I get when I hire one more worker. So it's going to be the 50 times 25. So let me go and actually just fill out this table. That's going to be sorry. It's going to be all right. Kind of went through all those slides at once, and this is becoming a little bit more. It's the way that I've got this set up. It's becoming a little bit more sensitive than I had wanted it to be. I think it's because I've got this too large still. Sorry. All right, so right. So the total benefit. This is just 25 times 60, 25 times 210. Okay. 25 times 250 gives us 6250. 25 times 280 is 7,000. 25 times 300 is the 7,500. All right, the marginal benefit is the additional contribution of one more worker. So it's these additional 50 meals times the 25, right? That's my 1250. And then going from here, I get 40 more meals, right? 40 more meals when I hired my third worker, or when I go from the third worker to the fourth worker. So those 40 meals times 25, 40 times 25, that's my 1,000 here, and so on and so forth. And so that's how I'm calculating marginal benefit. Now, as I'm hiring more workers, I'm incurring a cost, right? $10 per meal, food costs, right? Plus $300 per waiter, plus $500 for rent, plus $1,000 for the entrepreneur's time. All right, so this gives me my starting point, and then as I hire additional workers, what changes is I have to add an additional $300 per worker, plus I have to add an additional 10 times the number of additional meals, right? So I have so going from my total cost when I have 2 workers to my total cost when I have 3 workers, this $800, what this is doing is this is an additional $300 per waiter, right? I hired one more waiter, and then it's going to be the 10 times we said there's 50 more meals here. 10 times 50, 500. Okay, that's where that 800 is coming from. And so you do that calculation, and actually this is, we've got these values right here. And what the rational rule is going to tell us to do is keep producing up to the point where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. Oh, that happens right here at 500, right? So here, when I have 6 workers, the marginal benefit of the 6th worker, well, that was 500. The marginal cost of the 6th worker was 500. Marginal benefit equals marginal cost. That's going to maximize total profit. That's going to maximize total economic surplus. And we'll see that here, right? And so this is just taking profit or surplus as benefits minus costs. And so, yeah, maximal profit is maximized right here at the point where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Now, we see it says 1,200 right here. There's kind of like a mathematical reason for why that's the case. But the maximal profit is indeed 1,200. That is our max. Yeah, it's showing at but we wouldn't, even though this is showing up as 1,200, we wouldn't stop at the 5 workers by virtue of applying the rational rule. We want to hire the 6th worker because we want to go up to the point where the marginal benefit exactly equals the marginal cost. And so profit is maximized where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. And so that's kind of the point of the rational rule. All right. How many cups of coffee should I buy today? Well, you break this down to the question of, should I buy one more? Or how many tons of coffee should I produce? Should I produce one more? Or how many hours should I work as a barista? Should I work one more hour or one more shift or whatever is the case, right? That's how we'd apply the marginal principle in this context. All right, so here's a practice question then. According to the marginal principle and the rational rule, economic surplus is maximized when? Well, economic surplus is maximized when marginal cost equals marginal benefit. That's the correct answer here. Not when total cost equals total benefit. Not if total cost equals total benefits, your profits are 0. It might be the maximal profit if you have a competitive market. If average cost equals average benefit, no. If producers make as much as possible, no. We end up with the situation where economic surplus is maximized, where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. That's our optimal rule. So, all right, I'll go ahead and conclude here. In the next video, I'll conclude with the interdependence principle.